Good evening. Hello for everyone who is with us online and those who are with us today. We want to welcome you to our Parent Huddle. These are discussions that we have occasionally, recognizing that parenting is hard. And we need to just take some time to be heard, to listen, and to learn together. And so tonight, we bring you a Parent Huddle that's going to be a conversation on eating disorders. So as we begin, I want us to begin with a litany of attention, awareness, and love for our bodies. So what I'd like to ask us all to do is to breathe in and breathe out. Don't rush your breath. Feel your body, balance yourself, and pray with me. When we abandon our bodies to be absorbed in our screens, we return by our breath. When our bodies are overwhelmed with fear and anxiety, we take care with our breath. When we judge others and are judged by the appearance of our bodies, when we use our bodies to justify othering our fellow beings, we remember that we share the same breath. When we are consumed by thoughts of how we'd like to change our bodies, we marvel at the steady perfection of the breath. When our bodies feel like burdens or broken, we remember the incredible joys that come to us through our bodies. We value and celebrate bodies because God does. God who made bodies and said they were good. Jesus inhabited a body. Jesus knows what it's like to swim in the sea, to smell freshly baked bread, to hug someone that he loves dearly. The Spirit is our breath moving in and through us. It gives us life, moment to moment, freely and abundantly. Because of our faith, we proclaim the brilliance and beauty of our bodies as spiritual teachers and ask God's help in remembering and reclaiming their wisdom and joy. May our bodies be a blessing to us. May we use our bodies generously to bless the world. Our breath brings us back to ourselves. Our breath unites us with all beings. Through this embodied breath, this animating spirit, may we live and move and have our being. Amen.
Amen. We want to welcome you again to this very important discussion that we are going to have, and we are so excited to be able to bring this to you. And so I want to introduce our panelists for tonight. First is Betty Bowman. She is a congregational care minister and current student at Perkins School of Theology at SMU for a certificate of spiritual direction. She began an eating disorder support group for family and friends in July of 2017, facilitated for a few years now, and is just part of a great team. She mentors girls with eating disorders of all ages and works with families of those suffering with an eating disorder. And she also had an eating disorder at age 17. She works with children and individuals struggling with anxiety, facilitated a chronic pain support group through the church for 2 years. She's married to her husband Ed and she's a mother of 3 children, Christina, Brooke, and Matthew. Betty, we're so glad that you're here. Oh, Betty. Yeah.
I can be there. Angela Harris is on her way. She's actually meeting with a support group right now, and so is going to be joining us in a few minutes. Angela is a member of Lover's Lane, has been attending here for about a year, and she attends our Thrive community. Angela went to college at University of Texas, Austin, and obtained her master's in social work from Texas State University. Angela is a licensed master social worker and specializes in clinical treatment of eating disorders. She was trained in eating disorders and now works with clients in a private practice in McKinney. Angela is passionate about providing comprehensive care for eating disorders and treating from a trauma-informed lens, and is also EMDR trained. Angela believes in a holistic healing process and strongly incorporates her beliefs in health at every size, intuitive eating, and all foods fit paradigms into her practice. Angela loves to collaborate with other professionals and often treats eating disorders with an interdisciplinary team of psychiatrists, PCP, and dietitians. Angela loves her husband, Caleb, and walking her dog, spending time with family and friends.
And our final panelist today is Martha Dunn. She is also a congregational care minister. She facilitates a group of mothers called Forever Moms who have lost children. And she works in Grief Share and in an eating disorder support group. She lost a daughter, Morgan, on October 30th, 2016, at age 23 to an eating disorder. Her father, Steve Dunn, is very involved at a national level with eating disorder education and research. And she has one son, Hanford, who's married, and two granddaughters, Kennedy and Riley.
Thank you, Martha.
Thanks. And so we just kind of want to start off with the blanket question of what are eating disorders? So if you guys will kick us off with that.
All right, let's go. We're going to just do this conversationally. If you have questions, feel free to put those in the chat or on Facebook. I'll be monitoring that. And then, of course, questions to the room, you can just call Mackenzie over. But we're just going to have a conversation today. So I'm going to hand it to y'all.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm going to start out just by explaining the definitions of eating disorders, because you've hear the general term eating disorders, but there's several different types. The one you've probably heard the most of is Anorexia Nervosa, and this is self-imposed starvation. So the individuals want to maintain a very low weight. They won't eat. We'll go into signs and symptoms of all of them in just a bit. But that's the one that you hear about the most. It's very dangerous because most of them just keep not eating, which is what happened to me. I was blessed that I was able to get help in time. And the next one is Bulimia Nervosa, and this is repeated cycles of binge eating and then purging. And this one is also very dangerous and deadly also, but you don't notice it as much. Many times when someone has anorexia, you can tell they start losing weight, and many times it's very rapid. With bulimia, since they binge and then purge, they many times look the same. So you have to be really cognizant of the behaviors and signs and symptoms. The third one that is the most that you hear also is binge eating disorder. And this is when people just binge eat. And there's no purging involved, but it is very shameful to them. Many times they'll do it at times when it's not a normal meal or snack time late at night. And it's just out of control eating. There's two other kinds that you don't hear about much. One is just OSFED, which is other specified feeding or eating disorder. And that is just eating disorders that don't meet the criteria of the other three. And there's newer ones, such as someone who just wants to eat clean or won't eat certain foods. There's another one for diabetics that they won't use their insulin because they want to lose weight. And then there's also one called UFED, which is unspecified feeding or eating disorder. So again, the spectrum is large. There's many different manifestations and kinds. But the reason we're doing this panel is it's just so important for parents to learn, grandparents, family, friends. It takes a village, and it's so important to speak up about this because especially while children are younger and living in the home. As Martha and I have noticed in a lot of the mentoring, once they hit 18 and they've gone off to college and they're on their own, it gets really hard and to get care for them. And they're not under your eyes, and it can get very, very dangerous. So Martha, you're just going to talk about some signs and symptoms.
One of the things was just kind of what to look for. And again, we're not trying to scare parents. We're not trying to, we already have a lot of things to take care of. But this is just an awareness, and it's pretty much see something, say something, and don't feel ashamed that, oh gosh, I might be over the top. The way my daughter's eating disorder was actually diagnosed was through her friends. They actually went to the school counselor and said she's vomiting after meals secretly in the bathroom. Otherwise, I probably would not have known because she looked normal. Her weight was somewhat normal, but then she kind of spiraled in a different direction. But there were certain things that I had not really honed in on, but after every meal, she would immediately go to the bathroom, or she would eat a lot. She'd eat, an entire meal and then immediately run to the bathroom. Also, her cheeks were kind of puffy. And it was also just kind of more her mood. She was very up and down, and I kept saying, oh, it's just a teenage thing. They just don't want to talk to me. But after a while, I guess there's certain behaviors that you just kind of look at and you go, okay, we're kind of outside the normal range. For anorexia, you'll see a huge weight loss. And of course, a lot of people say, oh, it's spring break. I'm getting ready to go to the beach. And it becomes almost a competition. Many folks with eating disorders are perfectionists. They're normally very smart. And so they'd really try to manage every calorie. They could probably tell you the number of grams in every single bit of food. And so they...
I just, since I had the anorexia to this day, I can still remember how many calories are in everything. And one thing we will talk about is triggers, such as like when you go to a restaurant and you see the calories. At my age, that still triggers me, not to have an eating disorder, but it just sends me over the edge. So for people who are suffering, certain things are like that. And one other thing with the anorexia, for me, besides not eating, was I loved cooking for everybody else because it kept the emphasis off of me. And then I also did the compulsive exercise. And it started out small, but then it got bigger and bigger. So.
And then also my daughter started wearing huge clothes, like a double XL sweatshirt when she's like a small. So it's like they're almost ashamed of it themselves, and so they don't want you to kind of see what's underneath. Just the moodiness, and also kind of they're preoccupied with food. Kind of like Betty said, they'll fix things for everybody else, but then they won't want to actually eat, or they'll become isolated. Sometimes they'll pull away from friends, just things that are just outside of normal behavior. A lot of folks with the eating disorder have a strong sense to want to control something. So sometimes it may not be about actual eating, but that's the only thing they can control. If their life is just spinning out of control, it's like, well, I can control what I put in my mouth. So therefore, I'm not going to put anything in my mouth. And so that they just become focused on that. Folks with high levels of anxiety, and in today's world, how you can't be anxious is beyond me. I mean, it's, with all the things going on, there's usually anxiety, depression, some OCD. And what I at least learn is, an eating disorder kind of lives in that part of the brain where addictions live. So it's kind of a mental illness that really presents itself in a very physical way. And the remedy seems so easy, like, well, just eat the hamburger. That will solve everything. Well, for somebody with an eating disorder, that's asking them to do something that's really impossible. That doesn't mesh in their mind. And so, very much like Betty said, the younger you can start to see things, and I know Betty has some stories from working in a cafeteria with third graders. If just when you see something, if you can either redirect behavior, sometimes kids are just parroting different things that they hear. What can we do to make eating just normal, just normalized behavior?
Back on that. So talk to me again, if you will reiterate to me there's three main types of eating disorders. If you'll kind of reiterate those back to me. And then I want to hear that because I have a 6-year-old daughter. And so what in my mind, eating disorders is a teenage young adult problem. And from everything that I am learning and reading that you two have given me, I am learning that there's things that I can do now, right, to see things that are happening, to see control issues, to see, to be able to catch some things now. So if you'll reiterate those 3 eating disorders and then bring us back, I want to hear the story about the third grader.
Okay, so the 3 again were the anorexia, and that is just not eating. And that one, many times, like Martha said, is coupled with the exercise. If you're at the dinner table, they sometimes will slide food under a napkin. I mean, they get very, very creative in what they do. And I've had several parents that I've confronted with, brought to their attention that their daughter was struggling. And they said, well, she eats dinner at home, fine. Well, it was her friends from school, just like Martha's daughter, that brought it to our attention. And she wasn't eating anywhere else but at home, so that mom wouldn't worry. And then bulimia nervosa is really, it's got components of the anorexia. They do restrict, but then they purge and they throw up. And they know how to do this very well. And parents, they can actually Google how to do this. It's very sad. But there's things you can look for. They use laxatives. So if you see some of those around the house. And then the other one is binge eating. And this one is different in the sense that they don't purge or restrict. They just eat. So if you see, and lots of times they hide things. So if your child, you go upstairs and they've got bags of Cheetos and everything under the bed, that might be a question. So the thing is that all of these, the one thing, like Martha mentioned, and right now, especially with the girls that I mentor, it's this isolation with COVID has been so hard. And they've been home, they've been alone, the older ones, and it's just been tough. And so they do go into isolation lots of times, and they won't go to their friend's house. They will just either, for me, I came home every day and rode my bike for 12 miles. So anyhow,
I think it becomes almost a competition. If you're with like we had daughters, but this is also pretty prevalent in boys, especially boys that wrestle, and that they have to make a certain weight on, wrestling day. And they will starve themselves, they will get in sweatsuits, they will do everything they can to make weight, and then immediately go and just eat as much as possible. And so, is it an eating disorder? It's sort of disordered eating. And, if they can just do that only while they're in high school, that's great. But there are others that once they kind of get into that habit, it just keeps going. I think Mark Cuban's brother, Brian Cuban, actually had that.
Yeah.
Where he would, restrict, and he would go out and every day run like 12 miles. And it was one of those, if I eat the donut, that's 310 calories. I need to go run 4.3 miles in order to burn off all of that. So it's a very calculated disease.
Right. And it's there's a lot of shame involved, both for the person going through it and sometimes even their families, because, lots of times you hear that if your child had cancer, you'd take it right to the doctor. But with an eating disorder, it's just iffy. And what do I do? Do I go to the pediatrician? Do I go to a psychiatrist? But I think we have seen them as young as, in treatment actually, as young as 8 to 10, boys and girls. And you actually start, I think there was a statistic here that, let's see, 81% of 10-year-olds are afraid of being fat. 42% of first through third graders want to be thinner. And so my story with I was working the cafeteria at the elementary school, and this was years ago because my kids are 21, 25, and 26. And this little girl, she was like in the third grade, and she had salad. And I said, don't you want some dressing? She didn't want anything, no other food and no dressing. And so that right there was like, you know, that's just not normal for a third grader. So you can pick up on some of these signs and symptoms.
And I think, too, it's just, and I know I'm guilty of this, if you're just sitting around talking with other moms or something, it's like, I got to lose 5 pounds so I can get into XYZ dress, or I got to, you know. Well, if a child may hear that and they go, okay, well then I need to lose 5 pounds. I mean, they just, and they don't know why, they're just kind of parroting back what they hear. And like, you know, maybe a third grader saying, I need the dressing on the side. Well, most likely they probably heard that in a restaurant. It's not like they thought of it themselves. And so they just kind of think that's normal. And so all we're trying to do is how can we just make eating fun again and just normal and just not so, you know, anxiety prone. And I think unfortunately in today's society, it's very much eat on the run. You get it in the drive-through, you're eating in the car, you're on the way to another soccer practice, and then you got, you know, here and there. So it's hard to normalize that in today's world. So really what we're just trying to bring to folks' attention is just kind of have your eyes open. It's kind of the see something, say something. If you're a parent, don't be afraid to just say, you know, I'm just not sure about what they're doing about this, and just want to, you know, take it down a notch and see what's going on.
And one thing too, I think today there's so many children and adults suffering with anxiety, and then there's a lot of components of the perfectionism and the OCD, and then eating disorders, and sometimes they're all lumped together, and you'll have one will be more prominent at another, but they're all signs to look for, and some of them can be you know, control issues, and some of them can be trauma. Some, you know, people, as children, have had trauma when they're younger, and it comes out later on. But the one thing that parents need to understand is that it's not a choice. There's something in the brain. It can start out easy enough, but there's something in the brain that will just click, and once it clicks, it just gets harder and harder to not, you know, have the behaviors. And the other thing is that a lot of parents think that they have caused their child's eating disorder. And so there's a lot of blame and shame on that. And there's a huge biological root component that they have found out that it's, so it's not the parents. There's in fact, Martha, if you want to talk about some of the risk factors.
You know, one risk factor is if there's somebody maybe in your family that has an addiction. A lot of eating disordered patients have family members that might be an alcoholic or might have, you know, some other addiction. And so it all kind of lives together up there. So my daughter, who had first started off with bulimia, then anorexia, but she was also an alcoholic. So, I mean, it was like just all of these things at once, and she was a perfectionist. She wanted to make all A's. So when you put all that stuff together, it's just, you know, a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and one thing, in children that are anxious, especially during this time, or exhibit signs of eating disorders, the one thing is it's better that they don't overdo in activities and sports, and stay close to home and friends and family instead of pushing them to do lots of different things, because that just brings on more anxiety and gives them more of a chance to kind of hide things.
I think one of also a lot of risk factors come in the way social media is very prevalent today. I mean, you can't turn on your phone without having, you know, oh, look at me before and after. I looked like this at 9 o'clock this morning, and now look at me, I'm 3 sizes smaller, and there's this perception of the ideal body shape is a size 0. And I think Betty was telling me a story about a group of girls they would go through and they would sit on top of the dryer, and then they'd turn the dryer on. If anything jiggled, they'd circle it, and it's like, okay, we got to get rid of this, we got to get rid of this. And that it becomes a competition, which if it was only a day or two, that's one thing, but some of these things just take hold. Like Betty said, it triggers something in the brain. But there was a study, it was very interesting, that was done on a tribe. They were on this an island out in the Pacific, isolated, no really lots of running water or anything like that. And, some missionaries went there and they were helping them and all this. And everybody there, I would say, was normal, and to the extent, they had to work and grow their food, and they ate normally, and they were normal sized. And then they introduced television. And then all of a sudden they had eating disorders, because all they saw was this perception of, this is what I should look like, and this is what I look like, so therefore there must be something wrong with me. So I think a lot of the social media kind of triggers people to think they're supposed to look like whatever that picture is on Instagram, even though it's been airbrushed and doctored and photoshopped 1,000 times. They don't see it that way. They think that is the reality, and so that's what they're striving to do.
So you're moving us into that discussion of social media. So so many of us are parents or grandparents or people who love children, teenagers, young adults. What can you teach us? What are we learning? What are you learning about body and image and social media?
Well, one thing at home that I think that's most important, and I've heard this from young kids that have gone through counseling, is they watch every single thing you do. So if you are going to spin class 3 times a week or 3 times a day, or talk about your weight constantly, or the fact that you want to lose weight, or just body image, I think that kids pick up on everything, and they don't think they're good enough. And sometimes they don't think they're good enough compared to a sibling or a parent even, and definitely to friends. They're always comparing. So I think the more family dinners are important, not to talk about the food, but get some of those conversational things and get them to talk, because eating disorders at the end of the day really aren't about the food. It's just the perception that I don't want to eat or I can't eat. And then the other thing is that you can just watch their behavior and watch the things they do, and don't push them into, I know there's so much now with, select soccer and gymnastics and all of that believe it or not, there's actually treatment centers that do nothing but treat these kids who are in these competitive sports. So even though they're great, that doesn't mean that your child might be wired to do that. My daughter was just really good at all sports, but when it got too intense, I knew she had to back off because it was just too much for her. So
I would say also, if you could maybe temper the whole social media, is you can't look at every single thing and think that is actual truth. It's like you have to know your own truth, and that people are going to put out there the story that they want you to know. It kind of goes back to Facebook. Nobody puts out on Facebook, gosh, I'm out of here. This life isn't, they always say, well, we just got back from this fabulous trip in Cabo, and look at my tan, and I just got this new bikini. And it's just, everybody puts out there and they spin their story so that it always looks great. And that if you could just tell kids, we're not having, you don't have to be that, because that probably isn't what that is over there. If you peel back the curtain, it's always something different. So maybe just, introduce reality in in a non-social media way, however that would be, because it's I think people just start to believe it becomes a competition. Like, I need to look like that person that they see online.
And maybe even talk about it in terms of, I know for myself, sometimes I'll be flipping through and see all these great vacations, and I say to myself, well, we're not going anywhere. So maybe being able to talk to your child that, it's real for everybody, but there's so many great sites. I work in animal rescue, and the only reason I have Facebook is because I look, when people need help with their animals. So there's a lot of good, healthy things they can look at, and there's a lot of positive gratitude, a lot of positive image websites. In fact, there's some of them on the handout there. So I think rather than saying no social media or taking phones away, work with them and just to watch what they're like. My daughter, I have her, we go through it together, and we laugh at some fun things, and then other things we're like, that's not true, that's not how they look. And I've told Martha the other day, I can't stand it when people do before and after pictures, whether they're trying to promote a weight loss product or whatever, and they think they're doing good. It's very demeaning to a lot of people. So
I think also just try to get back to talking to each other. I just feel, when you go into, no, this is pre-COVID. If you went into a restaurant and there's a family of 4, all 4 people are on their phones. Nobody's talking to each other. And then you can be in your same house and you text somebody, that's downstairs. It's kind of like we've lost the art of conversation because everything just goes out, behind this screen, and that's how you communicate. And I think that's where a lot of this isolation ends up happening. If we can just maybe get, and when kids are out with their friends, maybe if they could interact more with them, like conversation and whatever, as opposed to just all being on their phones. And I know that's extremely hard to do because I think a lot of kids are, and a lot of adults are addicted to their phones.
Yeah. I as one am addicted to my phone, but I will say that social media has offered me an opportunity because of my village to have really hard conversations with my kid.
Right.
And we are talking about racism and injustice in a way that I don't think I would have ever presented it with a 6-year-old, but
Right.
But being forced because of what my child has seen,
Right.
because she's with me when I'm on Facebook
Right.
or watching the news. And so, I do see, I think about the before and after pictures, and I'm trying to think about ways I could talk to my daughter about, because I have said, mommy needs to lose 15 pounds, and I didn't realize that until my daughter said to me, why do you need to lose 15 pounds? And I had to think about why and explain that to her. And so then to have a conversation, so I could see how, to be able to take that where it could be a trigger for someone, like Betty says, but it also could be a way for me to open up a conversation with my daughter in a hopefully helpful way.
Because you can't make it go away. I
Right.
think, anytime you do something like try to take something away from them, they're going to find a way, and they're going to not feel.
And you'd much rather hear it from you
Yeah.
than to hear it from somebody else.
Yeah. I also love the conversation we're having too, because to think about how it could affect another person, and that maybe how I'm posting or things that I'm doing, what's my purpose behind it, and how can I be most helpful?
Right.
So I really appreciate that in a way for me to think about more.
And I think it's just being aware. I also facilitate an infertility support group, and to me, I liken it to when you go to a function, the first thing adults ask is how many children you have, and how hard that is. People aren't trying to be mean. That's just, so I think when you can be conscious of what you're saying, what others are saying, is very important, because when we were talking about the different risk factors, the culture right now is, it's getting better, because I've been noticing a lot more ads with all different size women, but, thin is in, and, it's cool to have an eating disorder, and
That's the thing. There are websites that are pro eating disorder. So if they're out there too, so people can, if they go online, they can see, here's how you can become, a bulimic. Here's how you can become anorexic. Here's your diet for anorexia. So they kind of push that out there as options. So, I mean, there's good stuff, and then there's the other stuff too. So just be aware that both.
And one other factor that we haven't talked about, there is a biological link. There's a genetic link. And it may not be that someone else in your family's had an eating disorder, but they may have OCD or they may have anxiety. And that doesn't mean that, but it's something you can look for. And there is a definite family history of anxiety or addiction. The other part, one of those other eating disorders I talked about with like food allergies, there's lots of children that sometimes will only eat certain textures or certain things. That's fine, but those types of things sometimes can develop into eating disorders.
I remember my daughter, when she was going through her issues, all of a sudden she started putting almost like gallons of sriracha sauce on top of everything, that just didn't make sense. And she went from just, okay, we're gonna have this, and then everything had so much sriracha sauce, I don't even know how it was even edible. And then also, she would cut things in the smallest pieces possible. I don't even know how, it's like, a normal bite of food all of a sudden turned into about 15 bites of food. So it was very much a control of, I'm going to control the way everything looks, and then I'm going to control the way I eat it and how I eat it and that sort of thing.
And I think as parents, too, to introduce a wide range. Martha and I did a panel one time where we had handouts and we had candy out there, and one little girl came up and asked me where the carrots were. And, her mother was horrified that there was candy there. And, and I said, the theme of it was it's not about the food, but it's important to have, to feel good. Let them have the cupcake every now and then, but also have healthy foods. But if you just are so driven one way or another, or restrictive in yourself as a parent, in what they can eat, unless, of course, it's a health issue, I think it's important just to, keep it normal. Wide range. Hi, Angela. Hi.
So I'm so thankful for all of this information, and I've just been soaking it in just because it's so important, and moving into the asking questions and the helpful tools and that kind of thing. And I want to talk a little bit more, I know you touched on it, of how to introduce social media and how to have that be such a beautiful blessing, like Sarah said, but also to have those conversations. I work with students 7th through 12th grade, and so I get to see them kind of experiencing social media for the first time, having their own devices and access to it. And a lot of parents trying to figure out how to navigate that. And there's not a right or wrong answer, but as we move into the practical tools and the helpful tips and that kind of thing, maybe can we start with how you guys kind of advise us to walk with them as they figure out this social media piece that we're all trying to figure out as well?
Gosh, I wish I had an answer. I mean, the only thing I would say is I think a lot of times kids present emotionally, and so I unfortunately wrote off a lot of it as, oh, she's just a teenager. Oh, it's just it's a phase. It's just a phase. And rather than just say it's a phase, it's like maybe there's something happening in their life that has made them feel bad about themselves or made them think that they need to be, something else. So I think if I had one bit of advice, I would just kind of go backwards and say, maybe everything is not a phase, and maybe everything is not just because they're teenagers, because that is such a great place to start blaming things. But, I just recall it was in a youth group, and, all the kids were, chatting, and everybody seemed fine, and there was one kid in the back of the room that was just totally withdrawn. And an adult went over and was like, hey, because I think in the past they were just, oh, he's just a boy, and all that. But he was really sad. He goes, "There's no way I'm going to get into Princeton." You're 13. I mean, it's like, so it's just the amount of pressure they have. Well, had that person not gone and say, "You don't have to get into Princeton," and just, kind of talk to him, otherwise he would have just gone around with that, inside of him.
I think the other thing that I've found too with teenagers or youth is the texting. I always tell my own kids, if you can't say something to somebody's face, then don't text it. And that's probably good for adults too.
As adults, that's great.
Because they're just going
Well,
back
you can
and
hide
forth.
behind the screen.
You can hide behind the
Yeah.
screen.
And say, my dog actually sent that text,
But you can also sometimes find a lot of warning signs in text, as far as cries for help. So that might be another thing. I don't know, if you parents look through their kids' texts or if they even let them. But sometimes there's one thing I've learned the most in mentoring the girls that I've done it from 10 to 40, is that they are all they all want help, and they just seek it in very different ways. But underneath of it all, they're all asking for help. So you should always, if your eyes are open and you're noticing things, you should be able to find signs. Because the one thing, before we go in, we didn't do a lot of the statistics, but it is very frightening. Every 62 minutes, somebody dies of anorexia. And only 10% of people that suffer with eating disorders will seek treatment. And so there's 90% of those with eating disorders are women between 12 and 25. So I'm seeing a new surge in this 13 to 15-ish age, going through puberty, lots of anxiety, and some major eating disorders. So
Imagine Angela has.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Angela, you can.
Like nodding unfortunately strongly, like yes. So I'm a therapist and I specialize in working in eating disorders, and I've worked in treatment centers. So like you're saying, 10% seek treatment. I've been at the treatment when they show up. And it's a tough thing to work through. So in terms of like practical tools and what to say or what not to say, one of the big things as parents that can be done to really like navigate or encourage a great relationship with bodies is to talk about like not commenting on other people's bodies as a whole, right? So like if grandma or grandpa has lost a bunch of weight, or aunt, uncle, whoever, not necessarily saying like, hey, you look so great, because that kind of normalizes this thing of weight loss equals good. And the
And
reality,
just keep losing and keep losing.
and keep, yeah, right. Like
And
there's
there will
no
never
end.
be a post on Facebook or Instagram where somebody posts something, and even if they're on death's door, they will still get comments that they look good. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that so many times where teens are like, but everyone tells me I look great, and I'm like, but they don't actually know what's going on, really. Like,
Yeah.
Right.
not with your health, not with how you lost the weight.
And that's just culture, too. I mean, they're not gonna, it's just,
Yeah,
it's bad.
yeah, and I think that's why a lot of this takes so much intentional effort. Is culturally we just normalize weight loss, and being smaller is always better without question, right? And so that can be a really significant thing, is like whether or not people gain or lose weight, not necessarily saying anything about it.
Right. And talking about, one point is talking about the different, some people have pear shapes or something, and that God gave us all, unique bodies. And that's special. And sometimes that's the way God made you, or made another person, and shouldn't try to be something you're not.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like you were saying earlier, with the genetic predisposition to develop eating disorders, there's also genetic predisposition for body types. So, a lot of times people with eating disorders are fighting against a body type that's just ingrained in them. Like it's not their fault or bad, it's just different. So that's a big thing. And another piece too can also just be normalized changing bodies. And what I mean by that is, like, especially for parents and a lot of times moms, bodies change as you get older, right? And so a lot of times moms are like, oh, I need to lose the baby weight, or I need to like make sure I don't age and gain all this weight. And so just being a model for that, of like, my body can change and I don't have to go on a diet, or I don't have to like exercise excessively now. that can be okay too, right? Because I also work, like when I'm working with a lot of the teens and the young adults, you know, they're so afraid of gaining weight. And one of the questions I pose to them, they're like, I want recovery, but I don't want to gain weight. And I'm like, okay, well, what if you're like 50 and you weigh different than that you do now? And they're like, what? Like, I haven't thought about that, and that's horrifying. You know, so this idea of like our bodies, not just weight change, but change as we age, you know, like it's just natural. Another thing, if you already have a kid around you with an eating disorder, it can be really easy to just say, like, just eat. Like, just eat your food. It's not that hard. Like, open your mouth, put it in, chew, swallow, like, you know. And I've seen a lot of parents do that who mean well, who are trying to say, like, you're making it too big of a deal. I'm trying to make this easier for you. Like, just eat. And that just tends to make it worse, because then the kid is like, first of all, you don't get it, what I'm dealing with. And second of all, why can't I just eat? And they sometimes don't really know. I mean, I'm sure y'all have seen that too.
Yeah, but right before I was hospitalized, I ate for, I think, 3 or 4 months, I ate a boiled egg a day.
Yeah.
And that was it. And, you know, a lot of my issues were more control. I just had so much going on in my life, and the one thing at the end of the day, no one can make you eat unless you're in the hospital and you're on a feeding tube, which happens a lot.
Yes.
But really, nobody, they can yell at me, they can scream, they can sit, but they can't force me to eat. And so it is very much a control thing.
And the whole fear of gaining weight, Betty's working with this, she's, how old is 30-something? And she and I have met with her together, and she needed to go to the hospital, and they needed to give her an IV, and she was afraid of gaining weight from the IV.
Oh, wow.
So it's just, you know, you can't say this is saving your life, because they don't think that
And
way.
it's so ingrained, like, if I did this, I'm burning calories, I'm burning calories. And so, and then a lot of them, the kids, once they do go into treatment, if they have a feeding tube, they'll pull it out or they'll march around the room. So another big sign when we were talking about symptoms to look for, and I tell a lot of kids that come to me and ask about their friends, is the eating disorder voice in your head is mean. And these girls are the sweetest things in the world, but man, they turn mean.
Savage.
And use bad language with their parents, worse with their parents, but
Yeah.
definitely with their friends too. So there's a big change in personality, and sometimes it goes on and off like
You think they're
Jekyll and Hyde.
like a schizophrenic or something, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, in treatment, we'd have so many conversations about, like, who are you in the kitchen versus in the group, right? Because in the kitchen, they would be this really nasty, mean, like, version of themselves, which is really their eating disorder. you know?
Exactly.
And then in group, they're like, oh, I really want to get better, and I'm so sorry I treated you that way. And I think what's hard is, one, you know, being on the receiving end of that, of course, is difficult, especially if you're a family member, but two, being that kid. Like, they don't really understand their own back and forth. You know, I've had so many who come back from being real grumpy, you could say, and they're like, I don't know what took over me, but I just really could not, like, handle that burrito you wanted me to eat, you know? Yeah, so it's difficult.
And one thing, when we were talking about parents, don't label foods as good or bad. You know, that this is not healthy for you. Just food is food. Food is, you know, and some is, you know, more nourishing than others, but more the well-rounded. And also not to use food for rewards or punishment. Just food is what we do to, and this goes in line with a new theory everybody's talking about, is intuitive eating. We eat when we're hungry. We try to eat meals together as a family, and not, you know, because you've done something good, or you can't have this treat because you've been bad.
Yeah, absolutely. It made me think about that when you were talking about the event with the candy, and that one family was like, carrots. Like,
Right. It was already
With no
ingrained
dressing,
in the
no
child.
dressing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no ranch. on
Yeah,
the side.
yeah.
And Angela and I put together a list with a bunch of books and websites and such. There's one book that Jenny Schaefer's written. Well, she's written several, but it's Goodbye.
Goodbye, Edie, hello me?
Well,
Or
there's
Life Without
3
Ed?
of them, but there's one that, as a person, Goodbye Ed, hello me.
Yeah.
So for people with eating disorders, the Ed is the voice in their head. And as a person who's had that, that is one of the best books to read that spoke to me or several of the girls I've worked with. I don't know if
Yeah,
you've noticed
absolutely.
that too.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely like aligns with the experience usually. Yeah. We also encourage like family members and loved ones and parents to try to avoid like bringing your feelings about the situation into the moment. Meaning like, if your kid's not eating, I'm sure that's very distressing, right? Like it's very scary, it's very overwhelming, and sometimes parents take that fear and it turns into anger. So you just need to eat, just do it. Why can't you do this? Like, why is this happening? Or is it my fault? And all of that is really valid, but it sometimes just puts more stress on them. And so I usually encourage all those support people to either get your own counselor while this is happening, or to go to a support group, or talk to other people who are going through this, or even just people you trust, because it is a lot to deal with and to feel, but it's not
We were
necessarily
just
best
talking
to.
about that the other day about
Yeah.
yelling. I mean, as a parent, you say you don't want to, but sometimes it's hard. It's hard being a parent with children that are struggling. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's very important to get help.
You know, Betty has been mentoring like kids to young women, and I've seen it be quite effective because some, especially a teenage girl or somebody in their 20s that is past the age where the parent can actually say, you have to go to this doctor. She is much less threatening. A parent, it's very difficult to strip out emotion and, put all those things aside and Betty can just be, I'm just a person that is compassionate about you, but I'm not here to judge you. I've been through this and I've come out the other side. And so they become accountable to her instead of the parent. They'd much rather talk to her than a parent. And so, I've seen that, or some sort of group outside of parents. And so it's not like the parents are bad, but it's just like some kids just would rather talk to somebody else. And so that's why I think the therapy or the support group or a mentorship is such a great tool. It's like sometimes, the best way a parent can fix it is to look to those resources rather than trying to do it themselves.
And remind me again the name of the book that you were just referring to.
Goodbye, Ed, hello me.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Ed, like ED.
Eating
She
disorder.
also wrote one earlier, and then there was another one recently called Almost Anorexic, which is really good. There's also another book similar to that called Almost Alcoholic, which is just very good because as you get into high school and college, those two go very much. Anxiety, eating disorders, and drinking alcohol are just very and that's
Codependent.
Codependent. And once it gets to that point, it's very, very scary. So.
And these three women have put together an incredible resource list, and that is on our website, lumc.org/family, along with all of the handouts that we have here in the room. Those are all on our website so that people
And we
can
do
get
have
those.
we do have a support group that has been for family and friends who have children or loved ones or just want to learn more about eating disorders, and we're probably going to expand that to include even anxiety, OCD, several, because they all go hand in hand. And for parents, sometimes it's just you're at a loss, and it may be hard to talk to other people about it. So this is a safe place, not for the kids, but or siblings, older siblings who might be worried about, someone far away. So we do have that resource right here at the church. So it's good to know. And the one other thing with like Angela was saying, it takes a team. If someone is being treated for an eating disorder, there's usually a pediatrician, a therapist, a psychiatrist, and a dietitian involved. And so if you do think your child or someone contact any one of us, where we have the resources. Obviously, Angela's a therapist. I work with two really good physicians that just take care of adolescents, girls to women and boys to men, ages like 13 to 25. So, there's the resources are out there, but it's sometimes very daunting for parents to know where to start.
Yeah.
And we'll put your info up on a slide at the end, but I want to kind of get to, I know we have some good questions online and some in person as well, but I wanted to just ask, you guys were talking about having those conversations with, children up to young adults, and I know usually treating and identifying eating disorder is very different than the more preventative conversation to have with your kids through young adults. But where do you start with that? Where do you advise parents to start with that for either conversation?
I think for me, I think it would just be, you just kind of be aware of what behaviors and what you're seeing from your children, because you don't, I don't think it'd be hard to go in and say, now, you need to, start having a conversation about, binging and purging, and they're looking at you like, I don't know what you're talking about, I mean, but a lot of it is I hate to say you'll just kind of know, but you'll see a behavior change. You'll see they're either withdrawn, or they, start the wearing the baggy clothes, or they start being really mean to you.
Yeah, around food especially.
And all the time, so. I think it's just that's kind of like the flag that goes up that goes, okay, if there may be a pattern here that I'm seeing.
But before that happens, like when Sarah asked, is just having food not to be having family dinners, keeping the word diet out of your vocabulary, and just how you portray yourself around other people. And another big thing is notice their friends, who they're, what they're doing and saying. I always used to try to volunteer wherever I saw the kids, whether it was in the library or, in their, if they're in a room, just, keep your eyes and ears open.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and I think going into that too, like we've been saying, is like keeping food as a neutral topic from the start, or if it's not, maybe try to change that as a family. Like, food is just what it is. It's just part of our lives. And I tell sometimes clients or families, like, we eventually want eating to be just like other basic needs, right? Like sleep and going to the bathroom. No one is like, how long did you hold it today? And like interested in that, right? Like, it's just like things we need to do to like function.
Yeah.
And that's true for food also. So that definitely helps with the preventative. And I think if you're noticing things or you're worried about your kid, it just helps to ask, like, hey, and you can ask an open-ended question, and sometimes that'll give you more information. Like, tell me how you feel about food lately. And you might be like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? What? Like, well, I noticed you seem a little more anxious. Like, is that how you're feeling? What's going on there? And, they may open up to you, and if not, encourage them to talk to someone who they might. But that just asking sometimes can help. And I think sometimes parents are afraid to ask, like it's gonna spark an idea, but probably not. You're probably already seeing something that's there. And if it's not happening, they know it's happening. Other kids are doing it. So I think it's good to just be open about it.
Yeah, I think that I want to hit on that again, because some of the things that I've read, I keep reading and hearing and seeing. Don't be afraid to ask, because we are, as parents, we think if I ask, then that's going to put it in their head.
Then they're going to start it.
Which you just said is not true.
No.
And so don't be afraid to ask. And I need to hear that over and over and over. As a parent, don't be afraid to ask. And I loved the language that you used, because I could sit down and say, how are you feeling about food? How are you feeling about eating? How are you feeling about this type of food or this type of food?
Yeah, exactly. Just asking them, like, how are you feeling about that? How do you feel about exercise or your body? Really asking about how they feel about their bodies. If we're talking traditional eating disorders, that's going to bring up a lot. Okay. And not to get too off topic, but I would also just kind of put a PSA out there. This applies for suicide too. Yeah. There's a lot of teens that are having the thoughts. They know what it is. Asking about it is not going to create it in their brains, but it might mean you're having an open conversation before it's more of a problem. So that's another conversation for another time. But it's a similar thing. If
That's
people
another
don't,
parent huddle.
Yeah, but people don't want to
Another
ask.
parent huddle. Okay, next one.
But it's important. Yeah.
The other thing too is the bullying and teasing that gets done, at school with your children, and sometimes you might even find yourself saying things like, "Oh my gosh, she's gained a lot of weight." They're listening to everything, and I think that you can have conversations with them to embrace people at school that may be sitting alone because they're overweight or underweight or whatever, and because that's where a lot of bullying happens at school, and is how people look or their body image, and I think the more you can teach your child at home to to not do that, but then also to be an advocate for others at school.
Yeah. And going off of that, I know there's probably more questions, but real quick, you said like people commenting on each other's bodies and stuff. Like I would also encourage parents, like your role as a parent is to also protect that from other family members, right? So if grandma is like, oh, you're kind of big, like that as the parent, you get to be like, no, which is again, a whole other conversation about boundaries and stuff.
Right.
But you're allowed to do that. And I like to empower families to do that because they get it from family members that mean well, but it sometimes makes it worse.
Hey, question from the audience, the live audience. Thank y'all so much for offering this. So I loved how you made the comparison between other addiction disorders and eating disorders. So what I know of my research of other addiction disorders, there's certain nutrients that can be helpful, like B vitamins and zinc and magnesium. Is there anything that you're aware of in terms of nutrients that can be helpful in eating disorders as well?
Ooh, I know there's some research. There's a doctor in North Carolina, I think at UNC, that is working on a gut bacteria that I guess in a binge and purge kind of cycle, once you get rid of that certain something, you stay in that cycle about reintroducing. It's some particular bacteria. I know that they've been working on that. I wish there was a pill. I mean, if there was some magic something or other, I'd be all over it, you know. But I am not aware. I mean,
No, I know they're doing a lot of studies with, the relationship with the gut and the brain, and functional medicine doctors and integrative medicine doctors, probably would have more about this, but
Yeah, or your friendly eating disorder dietitian. That's what I always defer to when people ask me about nutrients and good questions. I'm like, call a dietitian. So yeah, someone else might know, but I don't.
So I have a question. It says, can some of this start when toddlers are forced to eat things they don't like or overfed? What about setting a healthy way of eating for the very youngest? So as we're thinking of maybe some parents who are watching that have littles or grandchildren or take care of littles, what can we do to help for our littlest or prevent this from our littlest?
Yeah, I would say, kind of you brought up earlier, intuitive eating. What I love about intuitive eating is that we're born with it, right? So kids, like babies, eat when they're hungry and stop when they're full. And so what you can do as family members or loved ones or parents is allow them to continue that, right? So if they want more, you give them more. And if they're done, then they're done. In terms of forcing them to eat things, I would encourage parents to just have them try stuff, not necessarily force more of it. I'm sure we probably didn't talk about ARFID, but that's another
yes,
eating disorder.
yeah.
Okay.
So like for example, my son had to deal with texture, and I mean, I don't think he ate a hamburger till he was 8 because it was yogurt. It had to be smooth and soft, and I wasn't going to make him eat a hamburger. Eventually, he did. But I think, like Angela said, to introduce different foods, and having that dinner table where they can try different things, but never ever make them finish their plate, or they can't get up till they finish.
It's exactly like you had said, intuitive eating. Like when you're a baby, you eat like every 2 to 3 hours. And so, I've seen kids that will have a dinner plate and they'll eat basically about half of it, but they don't throw it away. And then 3 hours later, they'll come back and eat the rest of it. And so, that to me, that's normal. And so if they want to eat every 2 or 3 hours, it's like,
Yeah.
And there's a great book in that list called Mindful Eating, and it's the same thing with the intuitive eating. And and I'm saying only this as a parent of 3 20-somethings, if they just eat chicken fingers and fries, they're not going to die.
And if they start
They'll
to,
get
get them
over
help
it.
because of the ARFID, because ARFID's real too. But you don't have to worry about ARFID until they lose a bunch of weight. So yeah. But yeah, otherwise.
And I think another trigger or thing that, not trigger, but sign would be if you have a 10-year-old that decides they want to be vegan or whatever all these different ones are.
I need to go keto.
Yeah, that's not, that's not normal.
That's a really good point.
And that could be leading in a bad direction.
Yeah, especially if they're suddenly worried about like things like animal rights or the environment and they never have been before. I get a lot of kids who are like, well, that just justifies my restriction. Like, that's why I said that. So it's not that they can't care about those things. It's just if it kind of comes out of nowhere with restriction,
Yeah.
something to
And
look
one
at.
can lead to another. I'm not going to eat a chicken because that's an animal, and then it turns into this, and all of a sudden they've got only 3 or 4 things they'll eat, and that's a problem. So,
Yeah.
which really was never, ever there a long time ago. So.
But I think, I mean, I came from a generation of you need to finish everything on your plate before you can have a dessert. Or you need to, you know, it was always, they're starving children in China and you need to finish all of this. And so it became everything had to go.
Yeah.
So, you know, I love your mindfulness of,
They'll eat when
you
they're
know,
hungry.
normally, like, you don't see a 3-month-old that's normally anorexic. You know, they eat when they're hungry, and if you can just grab onto that behavior and just perpetuate it, you know, I think that would be great.
Yeah, and I think that there was a part of that question about like overfeeding. That doesn't really happen if they're intuitively eating, right? Like they can be served a plate that's full, and if they're full, then they'll stop, and then there's no overeating going on. So doesn't necessarily have to be a problem if they continue with the mindful eating.
Okay. I know I have a 2.5-year-old. My older child was not picky at all, and she would eat anything I put on her plate, and so we always shared meals with her. We never ordered a kid's meal, but I can see, I'm wondering what's going to happen with my younger one, because he is a little bit more particular. We don't dip it in ketchup; it's probably not going in. And
That's a vegetable, by the way, in my book.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about you know, ways to make sure to try to continue to give him lots of choices, lots of nutritious choices, and just ways that we can do that. So I had a great question here. What about changing the way we talk to little girls, especially, not commenting on looks? So maybe those of us that are listening, what are some things that we can do? And then I have a kind of a follow-up to that. What are some things as a person who hears people commenting that I can do that's helpful and maybe not aggressive or damaging?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that, I think it's when you talk about how we say exactly what our grandparents and our parents said. Oh, you're such a big girl. You're such a big girl. Well, you know, if they're not hearing that right, it's like big because I'm tall, big because I'm, you know, it can just have all sorts of meaning. Rather just commenting about people's, you know, looks, can we talk about who they are? You're such a loving person. It was so compassionate when you fed that homeless person a sandwich. I mean, you know, something about their actions, not just how they appear.
And especially, you're so pretty. There's an article, I didn't bring it, but I do have one, and it's just everybody's always told, and it's really hard, in all honesty, for those girls that really are pretty. That's all they hear. There's no self-worth there. You're smart, you're good, you know, you're this, you're that. So I think it's important to just stay off the looks of any kind, you know, and just focus on all the good things they are.
Yeah, like focusing on their strengths, which is what
Strengths,
you're saying.
right.
Yeah,
And
like,
not how they look.
yeah, you're so friendly or compassionate.
But I think,
or-
again, just like we were talking before, just when you see a little girl, oh, you're so cute, you're so pretty, you know? And I don't know how many times on Facebook somebody posts a picture, stunning, lovely, gorgeous, you know? And it's just, you know, which, you know, they're just trying to be nice, but, you know, that doesn't really, that doesn't really talk about the girl herself. So.
Yeah, who she is as a person kind of thing. Yeah, and I think in terms of like if someone does say something, it kind of depends on who the person is, you know? So if it is someone really close in your life all the time, if I were in that situation, I would pull them aside at some point and say, hey, like as a family, we don't do these things. Instead, I'd ask you to like comment on her strengths, like what we're talking about. But if it's someone like rando that you just run into, because that happens sometimes, you can just kind of redirect it, be like, oh, cool, we're like getting a sandwich, like whatever, you know, move on. But then you can talk to your kid later about it and be like, hey, especially if it hits them any kind of way. Like, I know this person said that. How are you feeling about that? I know we don't do those kind of things in our house, so maybe that was weird for you or different. And just help them kind of process that and reframe that if they need to. So I think it just depends on the situation. Like you said, you don't want to be aggressive with people, but if it's like a recurring problem with someone you know, you can probably address it individually, but otherwise just kind of helping your kid navigate the world. Because the other reality is they are going to get those comments, right? Like you can control your home, but when they go off to college and stuff, they're going to have to know how to navigate that. And so it's also important to teach them how to respond to those things.
And you don't want their whole self-worth to be in those comments.
Yeah.
It's like, gosh, that's the only thing I have is I'm pretty or whatever. That's how I'm judged, is my self-worth.
Yeah.
And girls in particular listen very closely to what dads say, believe it or not. I mean, all family members, but the emphasis a dad puts on a daughter as far as looks are concerned can be very, you just have to be careful. So.
Yeah. And I'll say too, if you have a kid going through treatment or weight restoration, which is like regaining weight after it's been dramatically lost, one that I hear so much that's really hard for them is, you look so healthy. That to them is like, I'm fat now.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
Now I'm fat. Yeah,
now
I
I'm
can get
fat.
that, yeah.
And so if you know anyone or you have a kid and going through that, like that is just a phrase that is meant to be so supportive, but it is like so hard for them to hear.
So, what are things that we can say? And I'm thinking
Yeah.
about me personally or friends of mine who are trying to take better care of themselves. They are trying to eat and exercise more, and so are naturally losing a few pounds. So, in the instance that you were just saying, you look so healthy, what are some things that we can say that are supportive and affirming, but not, wow, you look great, you've lost weight? So, what are some things that we can do?
Yeah.
Well, I think if you do it in terms like what Angela was saying was more for someone going through treatment or after, holidays are awful, that's when grandma comes and says you're so thin or something, but, or you're not eating. But I think in the home, if you are trying to lose weight or you want to be healthier, put it in terms of that, I just want to be healthy, and I can't move around as much or something like that. I don't think you can be real, you don't have to, try to be somebody you're not. It's just watch your words, that's
Are you
all.
thinking can you say, like, because your daughter's sitting there and you don't want her to, gosh, I'd turn to the therapist.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's kind of about context, right? So, like,
Yeah.
what your situation is describing is, like, what I'm hearing you say anyways. Like, that person is trying to make changes, right? So, in that sense, saying, like, hey, it looks like, your body's responding to those changes you made, like, that's great. That fits in context, right? I will say it's kind of tricky because unless you really know them, you don't actually know if that's disordered. So that can be where it kind of turns into like celebrating and praising eating disorders. So it really just depends. Like, how much do you know their story about it? I honestly kind of encourage people to just not ever say anything, really, even if it does seem like it's a completely positive and healthy change, just because it is so tricky and so kind of like touchy. But that's why I also say it depends on your relationship, right? So if it's like your spouse and they're not having an eating disorder, it can be different than like random person you see every 6 months kind of thing.
Yeah. All right. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten so much good information, and so I just wanted to kind of hear from y'all what would be, and each one of you can answer this, what is one helpful, practical kind of takeaway that you have for our parents? Or, we invited anybody that works with kids through young adults. So one practical, helpful kind of lingering thought.
Well, for me, it would be to listen. Listen to your children, watch and be aware of who they're with, what they say, what they do, and just be a big part of their lives. Volunteer with things that they are camping or Girl Scouts or whatever, because you can really notice a lot when you're with them.
And I would say don't be afraid to reach out to somebody. Even if you can't have a conversation with your child, just don't be afraid to reach out, whether it's, someone in the church or to a therapist, and say, I want to say something, I'm afraid to say something, what can I do? Rather than just kind of shoving it under the rug and say, well, it'll go away. Just don't be afraid, because usually if it's in your gut instinct, you're probably right.
Yeah, and I think along with that, I would just say, like, have the open conversations, right? Like, kind of we said it earlier, like, if you're worried about something, try to ask about it, because kids are pretty receptive to their parents being open, and you can be open about your own relationship with your body and food, and I'm enjoying this cake, or I'm enjoying my rest or my walk or whatever. All those things can be helpful.
Well, we are coming to the end of our time. Big, huge thank you to Angela and to Betty and to Martha for being here and being part of this conversation. We are really committed to difficult topics and things that we haven't usually talked about in church, we want to talk about. So if you have topics that are on your mind that we need to talk about and learn together, please make sure you send those to me. My contact information is on the website. You can email me and let me know. Or feel free to comment if you have any comments or topics that you want to talk about. Martha, Betty, and Angela's contact information, we have several slides that has their information. I'm also going to post that on our lumc.org/family page, so that if you would like to follow up or if you would like to join the support group, and we will be talking about that more, especially as she's opening that up to people that are dealing with all types of anxieties and things. I think that would be so helpful to parents. We'll keep kind of flashing up that information, and again, it'll be on our website. We just want to leave you with this. We want you to know that we are a community, and we are a village, and please reach out. There are people who want to sit with you, who want to listen, and just share whatever it is that you're dealing with. There are so many people with such big hearts for ministry that are called to ministry in such unique ways. And we want to connect you, and we want to be helpful because God offers us this community. Know that you are loved. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you soon.